From Washington, D.C., this is the Muslim News. Assalamu alaikum, I'm Hena Zuberi. Our top story tonight is about the Haitian president, Jovenel Moïse, who was assassinated early Wednesday morning at his home in the capital city of Port-au-Prince. Outgoing Prime Minister Claude Joseph said a commando unit formed by foreign elements who spoke English and Spanish were responsible. He also said that he's not in charge of the country in the wake of the murder. Moïse's wife was also injured in the attack. Moïse had been ruling Haiti by decree. Legislative elections due in 2018 were delayed in the wake of disputes. This included those centered on when Moïse's term in power was to end. Haiti is the poorest country in the Americas. 60% of Haitians live below the poverty line. An earthquake in 2010 killed more than 200,000 people and caused extensive damage to the country's infrastructure and economy. In a challenge to normalization of ties with Israel, Saudi Arabia is changing rules for imports from the United Arab Emirates. Goods that contain a component made or produced in Israel will not be allowed into Saudi Arabia. The ban includes merchandise manufactured by companies owned fully or partially by Israeli investors. Companies listed in the Arab boycott agreement regarding Israel will also be disqualified. Goods made in free zones in the region will not be considered locally made. These are areas in which foreign companies can operate under little regulation. Free zones are a major driver of the UAE's economy. The two neighboring countries are close allies, but they have diverged in recent years over relations with Israel. London Mayor Sadiq Khan is offering the city's youth the chance to win a ticket to the Euro 2020 football final if they get the COVID vaccine. The incentive comes as the vaccine rollout begins targeting Londoners aged 18 and over. England is in its first major championship final since 1966. The Euro 2020's final game will be played at London's Wembley Stadium on Sunday. The United Kingdom has administered nearly 34 million second doses so far, outstripping all EU countries. But its death toll, more than 128,000, is the highest in Europe.
If you go to a walk-in centre to receive the jab, if you make an appointment to receive the vaccine, you're entered into a draw, and it's possible for you to win a pair of tickets to watch the finals of the Euros this Sunday at Wembley, and 50 other pairs of tickets have been given to a exclusive viewing of the match in Trafalgar Square. Once in a lifetime opportunity. We're hoping as many Londoners as possible use the incentive of winning these tickets to get the jab.
The United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, is deeply disturbed by the death of Father Stan Swamy in India. He was in pre-trial detention. Father Swamy was an 84-year-old Indian rights activist and Jesuit priest. He was the oldest person to be accused of terrorism in India. The Indian government blamed him for violence between so-called lower caste Dalits and right-wing groups. Swamy maintained his innocence and rejected any links to the rebels. He said he was targeted over his work on caste injustice and struggles faced by marginalized groups.
We are deeply saddened and disturbed by the death of 84-year-old Father Stan Swamy, a human rights defender and Jesuit priest, in Mumbai on Monday. High Commissioner Michelle Bachelet and the UN's independent experts have repeatedly raised the cases of Father Stan and 15 other human rights defenders associated with the same events with the government of India over the past 3 years and urged their release from pre-trial detention.
Father Swamy's arrest sparked widespread outrage in India. The country's anti-terror laws allow the Indian government to designate an individual as a terrorist. Police can detain people for up to 6 months without producing any evidence. These laws are normally used against Kashmiris, Muslims, and their allies who demand justice. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo has issued a disaster declaration over gun violence in New York State. This is the first such declaration in the United States. It treats gun violence as a public health crisis.
And it is an emergency. And I want the people of the state to understand that. And I want them to respond to the emergency for the way it is. So today, first state in the nation is going to declare a disaster emergency on gun violence.
45-year-old Edward Cagney Matthews was arrested in Mount Laurel, New Jersey for harassing his Black neighbor. Cagney has a history of harassing this particular neighbor. She finally posted a video of him on social media that went viral. A large crowd of angry protesters gathered outside his home as he was escorted away by police. The video posted to social media shows Matthews repeatedly calling his neighbor the N-word. Matthews' behavior has been reported in the past. A $70 million global ransomware attack that started on Friday has hit the United States, Sweden, and New Zealand. The attack targeted Florida-based IT firm Kaseya. It also affected hundreds of Sweden's grocery stores as well as schools and kindergartens in New Zealand. The cyber attack locked up cash registers and affected school operations. The ransomware hackers are demanding $70 million to allow normal operations to resume. According to the New York Times, up to 1,500 businesses could be affected by a cyber attack carried out by a Russian group. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has named Mary Simon as the country's first Indigenous Governor-General.
I can announce that on my recommendation, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II has approved the appointment of Ms. Mary Simon as the 30th Governor-General of Canada. Today, after 154 years, our country takes a historic step. I cannot think of a better person to meet the moment.
Simon is a former broadcast journalist, diplomat, and advocate of Indigenous rights. She has previously served as president of Inuit Tapriat Kanatami, Canada's national Inuit organization. Simon has been credited with helping negotiate a 1975 landmark deal between the Cree and Inuit tribes and Quebec's provincial government. It has been described as Canada's first modern treaty with the First Nations. Her appointment comes at a difficult period. The discovery of more than 1,000 unmarked pupils' graves at former Indigenous residential schools has convulsed Canada. It has provoked anger and grief in Indigenous communities. Until the 1990s, some 150,000 Indigenous Inuit and Métis children were forcibly enrolled in 139 residential schools run by the Catholic Church on behalf of the government. More than 4,000 students died of disease and neglect. Human Rights Watch and Bet Shalom both consider Israel an apartheid state. Watch this report by Ali Khalaf and Saleha Farouk. They show how Palestinian farmland is being destroyed by the apartheid regime.
Both the United States and the United Nations considers Jewish settlements in occupied Palestine illegal. But American Zionists fund them and the Israeli government protects them. There are 675,481 Jewish settlers, and expanding by the day. Jewish settlers are free, Palestinians are not. All Jewish settlers have guns. They are on a daily mission to make Palestinian lives impossible. They routinely beat Palestinians and steal their homes and land like Yaqub.
You are stealing my house.
And if I don't steal it, someone else is going to steal it.
Here is a Jewish settler forcing his sheep into Palestinian fields. This is a common technique used to expand their control into Palestinian property. These herds of the Jewish settlers not only destroy Palestinian farms, but their olive trees and apricot orchards. Hossein Aid, the Palestinian farmer, claims that settlers took 38 acres of his land. Another Palestinian, farmer Rabhi Jeffrey, said that these shepherds are a part of Jewish settlement plans.
They give damages to all types of trees, especially olive trees. He is committing sabotage. Israeli settlers have been preventing the entry of Palestinians to this region by claiming that the region belongs to them.
This is a story of settlers' expansion into occupied Palestine. That is how occupied Palestine now looks like Swiss cheese. There are 164 Israeli-approved settlements. There are also 116 other settlements that even Israel does not formally recognize. But Israel supports them all.
Coming up next after the break is our in-depth analysis segment, so stay tuned and we'll be right back after these messages.
If I could be you, and you could be me for just 1 hour. If we could find a way to get inside each other's minds. Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes. Well, before you abuse, criticize, and accuse. Walk a mile in my shoes.
Despite the development of a COVID-19 vaccine, millions around the world will not have access. We need a vaccine that's free and available to everyone, everywhere. It's time for a people's vaccine.
Welcome back. Summer is here and parents are looking for ways to keep their children busy. Teachers are urging them to take summer reading challenges. Rabia, Khokhar, an elementary school teacher in Canada, created one that centers around Muslim voices and authors. Her book list has gone viral. Rabia Khokhar is joining Saliha Farouk for a detailed conversation. Over to you, Saliha.
Thank you. Today we're here with Rabia Khokhar, who is an elementary school teacher in Toronto. Rabia, thank you so much for your time today on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Our pleasure. Now, following the recent string of Muslim-targeted public attacks, Canadian Muslims everywhere are sharing their recommendations to build inclusivity. But you took it a step further by curating a reading list aimed towards children and youth. Please tell us a little bit about where this idea came from.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think that there's so many people who are doing this work to create a lot of inclusion and equity. And I think as an elementary teacher and former teacher librarian, books have always been the ways that I carry out curriculum, or I think critically about curriculum. So I'm always thinking about like whose voice is represented, who's missing. And so, you know, in my research and in my work, I find that a lot of the times Muslims are only represented in a very single or monolithic way. You know, there's a lot of single stories that are, you know, present about Muslim people and Muslim communities. And a lot of those stories really situate us out of the West. They really sort of situate us like away from a North American context. And so, you know, this reading list was something, this reading challenge was something that was on my mind for a long time, but I just really got busy with schoolwork and stuff. So, you know, I was in the process of making it. And then with the recent attacks and, you know, anti-Muslim hate that was really prevalent and rampant, I was just encouraged to, you know, complete it and like go back to the challenge. And I really feel like I wanted to do something to really counter the hate and the stereotypes that are always associated with Muslims and Muslim identities. And so, you know, with this reading list, what I really wanted to do was really restore the humanity of Muslims and, you know, really show that we're not a monolith, that we are diverse and dynamic. And I really wanted to show, Muslim characters in, universal experiences like friendship, cooking, family, all of those really everyday experiences, because, I really feel like when we think critically about those experiences, and when we see positive representation like that, that's really one of the ways that we can restore our humanity and our dignity, and really affirm our Muslim children's identities, but also expand so that other people can also see us as, in our everyday lives and experiences. And so that was sort of like the thought process behind the challenge. And I always feel like books are a tool for justice and fairness. And so how can we mobilize those to really help our children really think about their role in creating a more inclusive world and community and society?
Now, you're an educator by profession, of course. Within the classroom, how does reading help perpetuate those alternative perspectives that you mentioned, as well as experience, as well as help shape the trajectory of children's learning?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. I think reading is so fundamental, especially in an elementary classroom or elementary space. Books are really the ways in which we do curriculum, or that we springboard these conversations. And so if we as families and parents and guardians and educators can think critically about the types of resources and books that we're using to help our children learn to read, or build a love of reading, or launching curriculum topics, then that's really where we have a lot of positional power to make those intentional choices, and really bring in books and texts that are really going to affirm our students' identities and lived experiences, but also expand. We have to get to know each other. We have to know who we are. Because that really builds respect and bridges of understanding. And I think, books can really help us do that. And, if education is one of the ways that we can, move forward in terms of more inclusion and equity, then books and reading plays a fundamental role in creating that sustainable change.
You originally revealed the reading list over a Twitter thread, and a copy of it is also posted on your website, which actually gained a lot of traction initially when you released it over Twitter. What was the public's reaction to the reading list / reading challenge, and why do you think that it resonated with so many people?
Yeah, the response has been so tremendous, and it's been so humbling, because when I created it, I sort of had this lens of, it's something that educators or families could bring in to their spaces. But really just seeing this small reading challenge go into homes and spaces in Canada, but also internationally, is such a beautiful and tremendous feeling. And I just feel like it shows me that, we all want to do this work of equity and justice and authentic representation. I think it shows me that people want to work together to do this work. And, by sharing resources, that's one of the ways that we can, really build those solidarities, because I've seen people of all identities and experiences, interacting with the list. And I think that is a really beautiful thing. Oftentimes when we're experiencing anti-Muslim hate and Islamophobia, we can feel really alone. And I think what, this has really showed me is that, there are people of all identities ready and willing to work together and be in solidarity with us and be allies with us. And I think, this reading list has really helped me, or this, reading challenge has really showed me that it's almost like hopeful, and it's reaffirmed this, like, our commitment to this work of creating change, and, recognizing when things are unfair, and how we can all mobilize ourselves and come together to really create this change.
Now, with the tragic events that are occurring that are rooted in intolerance and racism, why would you say that it would be important to begin addressing such phenomena at the classroom level?
Yeah, oftentimes we say that our children are our future. And I think it's so true. if we want to create sustainable change, we can't wait until our children are older. There's often this idea that, children are innocent, or that, we shouldn't really share these things with them because we don't want to scare them. But, our children are part of our world, and they know what's happening in the world. And oftentimes they need an adult and somebody who loves them in their life to really help them, walk them through the things that are happening in the world and make sense of them, And so our children are very much part of this world. They know what's happening, and we can really mobilize their innate characteristics of like what's fair and what's unfair. A lot of our children, have this innate sense. And so I really feel like we have to start at the elementary level, at the foundational level, if we want people to know how to treat each other, what unfairness and what fairness looks like. We have to start at the core, and we can't really engage in this work without, centering our children. We have to invest in our children, and they are really the ones who are going to lead us towards a better future.
So this reading list that you have created that centers around Muslim characters is very closely linked to a previous anti-Black racism award-winning initiative that you are behind, that you recently did as well. Tell us about the relationship between the two, and also keeping in mind that within various school boards within the GTA, there has been a little bit of controversy regarding racism at different seniority levels within the schools. How would you link everything together?
Yeah, I think people in the past, last year, a lot of the times when there was like a lot of like, I guess a lot of like spotlight on anti-Black racism, not that it's like a new thing or anything. A lot of people did come together to create book lists. They came together to really create book lists and really resources that could help people move forward. And so, I wasn't really part of creating like any anti-Black racism book list, but I think, what inspired me was, how resources can really help us think critically about our actions. And so I think, all oppression is interconnected. So if we want to, rid of Islamophobia and anti-Muslim hate, we have to, fight for, anti-Black racism. We have to center Indigenous rights. And so, even though we experience the world differently and our oppression is, different, it is interconnected. So, we really have to come together. People of all identities have to come together to really fight for this change. We can't really see things as a single sided issue. We have to sort of see things in a holistic way, and that really means we all have to come together and recognize that we're all in this together in a way,
Thank you so much for that insight. And just to conclude, how can other educators and classrooms perhaps tap into this reading challenge if they haven't done so already?
So they can access the reading challenge on my website and, really help advocate or mobilize their local libraries or their school libraries to choose and get some of these books on the challenge, or also just, use this challenge as really like a springboard or a starting place to find more books that are more responsive and relevant for the communities that they're in and that they're serving.
We're here with Rabia Khokhar, who is an educator as well as an elementary teacher in Toronto. Once again, Rabia, thank you so much for your time with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Back to the new studio.
Thank you, Saleha and Ms. Khokhar. Fantastic list with some familiar names like Hena Khan and new ones like M.O. Yüksel. Before moving on to our next analysis, let's take a quick break. We'll be right back after these messages.
Our fellow Americans.
Right now, the COVID-19 vaccines are available to millions of Americans.
And soon, they will be available to everyone.
The science is clear. These vaccines will protect you and those you love from this dangerous and deadly disease.
They could save your life.
So we urge you to get vaccinated when it's available to you.
That's the first step to ending the pandemic and moving our country forward. It's up to you.
Dad, they took over my bedroom. Come on, come on. Okay, Dad. 1, 2, 3. Dad! You saved me. Dad?
Are you okay?
I'm fine, dear.
Your hero needs you now, and AARP is here to help. Find the care guides you need at aarp.org/caregiving.
Welcome back. Republicans intend to retake the U.S. House of Representatives in 2022 through gerrymandering. To learn more about this phenomena and how Republicans can win the next elections, analyst David Daley joins Imam Abdul Malik Mujahid for an insightful discussion. Over to you, Imam Mujahid.
Thank you, Hena. Republicans are happy. They're saying we don't have to work on issues and convince people, whatever population support they have, all they need to figure out how to divide up existing congressional seats, create some new, divide up, for example, Austin, where Democratic presence is there, into multiple spaces which are connected with the rural Texas. And here you can defeat Democrats. So before voting, well, to discuss this with us is David Daley, who is the author of Unrigged, How American Battled Back to Save Democracy. Well, so are you leading the battle back to take democracy in your control?
There's a lot of work to do here, that's for sure. I mean, I think you're exactly right. We have a minority rule problem in this country. Republicans are able to hold control even when they have fewer votes in states as well as in many national elections. And they intend to use that power, especially in 2022, because we're heading into another redistricting cycle. We redraw the lines of every state legislative and congressional district every 10 years. To account for population shifts, but Republicans are going to control this process in many states. Democrats right now only have a 5-seat advantage in the U.S. House, and I think it's entirely possible that that advantage could melt away simply through redistricting alone. The lines that Republicans can draw in Texas, Georgia, North Carolina, Florida, New Hampshire, Kansas, Tennessee, Kentucky, it could amount to 12 to 14 seats simply by shifting the lines. Democrats won 4.7 million more votes than Republican candidates for the House back in 2020. They could win by the same number in 2022, but these new lines, these new maps could shift control and give Republicans a majority even with far fewer votes.
So, and Republicans know that. Representative Ronnie Jackson in Texas, you have quoted him in your article. We have redistricting coming up, and the Republicans control most of the process in most of the states around the country. Was that a thoughtful strategy Republican adopted, or that's how things were?
Yeah, they're not denying what they intend to do, right? This is a time bomb planted at the heart of American democracy, and they fully intend to implode it for maximum advantage. Look, this was the Republican strategy first back in 2010, which was the last time we went through a redistricting cycle here. The 2010 election, of course, was the first national election after Barack Obama's big victory in 2008. Our first Black president, a Democratic supermajority in the US Senate, big majority in the US House. A lot of people looked at that race and said that the changing demographics of the country were going to cement a Democratic majority here for years to come. Republicans recognized that as consequential and historic as that 2008 election may have been, 2010 represented a path back to power through redistricting. It was a midterm election immediately following the election of a Democratic president. Those are traditionally good for the party on the outside. And because it's state legislatures that draw these state maps and the congressional maps, they recognize that if they won just 107 state legislative seats, around 16 states, they would have the ability to redraw on their own about 200 of the 435 seats in the US House. They did that, and they really haven't looked back ever since.
So that strategy worked. But how does gerrymandering works?
Sure. Gerrymandering really is the art and science of cracking and packing voters. So whenever you have a map of single member districts, right, how you arrange the lines can determine winners and losers. So for example, if all of the Democratic voters in the example you gave in Texas, so Austin is one of the fastest growing cities in the country, one of the most populous cities in the state of Texas. It's a very Democratic leaning city. But what Republicans did there is they drew the lines in such a way that they cracked Austin into 5 different districts, and Republicans represent 4 of them. So you draw the lines in such a way that you carve off a little piece of the city and attach it to a big part of rural Texas. When you are cracking and packing voters, essentially what you're doing, if you're packing, you are sticking as many of the other side's voters into one district as possible. So they win one seat overwhelmingly, right? Maybe 85% of the vote. But that means that there's fewer of their voters in all the other districts. So you can go ahead and win those. And when you're cracking them, you are diluting those votes. You're spreading them as narrowly as you can across as many districts as possible.
David, who started this gerrymandering? Has it been part of America all the time?
It has, unfortunately. You can trace gerrymandering back to our founding days. Patrick Henry tries to gerrymander James Madison out of the very first Continental Congress. It gets its name from Elbridge Gerry, the former governor of Massachusetts back in 1812. His party, the Democratic Republicans, drew a state Senate map around Boston that a political cartoonist thought looked like a salamander. And so the word gerrymander was born. But really, gerrymanders truly gain the kind of power that they have now only recently. As long as it's been with us, it's only had this kind of impact really ever since the kinds of computer software packages, the map making software that is so powerful and fast and precise, with the big data that is able to go into drawing these districts. Map makers now have the ability to go up and down streets and know almost to a science exactly how the people inside those houses vote. And they're able to craft lines that determine outcomes for a decade to come. The lines that Republicans drew in Wisconsin, Ohio, Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Florida, Texas back in 2010, they held for an entire decade. Democrats have not taken control of any of the state legislative chambers in any of those states for 10 years, even in years in which they win hundreds of thousands of more votes.
So Democrats definitely know this. Is there any type of good gerrymandering?
You know, no, I don't think there is necessarily good gerrymandering. I mean, I think that when these districts are drawn, they should be drawn carefully and to hold communities of interest together. And a community of interest can be defined in many ways, right? It could be the county you live in. It could be, you know, that several towns or several areas share a certain economic or regional interest. It could be an ethnic or a racial interest. But these decisions ought to be made by voters so that representation is enhanced, not by politicians so that their partisan interests are furthered.
Has this system ever been questioned in the court system?
It has. It's been questioned in the courts for years and years. And unfortunately, the U.S. Supreme Court, the conservatives on the court, voted along ideological lines back in 2019 to declare partisan gerrymandering a non-justiciable political issue. They effectively closed the federal courts to these complaints. And unfortunately, they did this at precisely the time that we most needed the courts, and that the lower federal courts had really been understanding the seriousness of this problem, and they'd been applying standards that worked and made a lot of sense in cases out of Michigan and North Carolina and many other states. What you're going to see in this next cycle is that these complaints are going to be filed in state courts, and state Supreme Courts in Pennsylvania and in North Carolina did overturn Republican gerrymandered maps in 2018 and 2019 and forced newer, fairer maps that immediately yielded fairer, more representative results.
What can people do to change this particular system in which their votes are essentially denied?
No, it's true. Listen, politicians like to keep this a secret because they want voters to think that gerrymandering and map making is boring and it involves, you know, math and drawing lines. But in reality, it is at the very heart of our system. These district lines are really the building blocks of our democracy, and citizens need to be involved, and they need to demand that this process be transparent and happen in public and not behind closed doors. And when citizens stand up and fight for fair maps, politicians back down. We have seen over the course of the last several years very, very popular citizen initiatives that have won in Michigan, in Utah, in Colorado, in Ohio, in Virginia, that have either banned partisan gerrymandering or have established some form of an independent or a bipartisan redistricting commission. So when citizens stand up on this, it doesn't matter if it's a red state, a blue state, a purple state, voters of all backgrounds hate gerrymandering and want to do something about it.
So there is a model of people fighting back and essentially taking it out of the partisan politics then. How many states are like that?
There are a handful of states that are like that, a growing number after 2018 and 2020. California certainly has perhaps the gold standard commission in the country, but now Michigan will use one. Arizona has a citizen commission. Virginia is going to have a new bipartisan commission, as does Colorado. There are a handful of states like Washington and New Jersey that do bipartisan commissions and effectively allow lawmakers of both sides to at least have some kind of say over the maps. What we know is that you get the most unfair maps when one party is in the room by themselves with complete control of the process. When you begin to open it up, when you let Democrats, Republicans, independents, citizens come in and have a say, you always get fairer maps.
Now tell me, in New York, they had elections recently for mayoral position, and Eric Adams won that through some sort of ranking system. Are there reforms which has an impact like that taking place in other places? And do you think those type of things are successful?
Yeah, I do actually. I think that they're extraordinarily successful, and certainly what we saw in New York is a historic election. I mean, ranked choice voting there really helped elect just the second Black mayor in New York's history. It elected the first city council that will be dominated by women in the city's history. It elected 19 new female members of color to the city council in New York. So that is just absolutely tremendous. There is a reform that has been introduced in Congress called the Fair Representation Act, which Virginia Democrat Don Beyer has proposed along with a handful of other co-sponsorers. And what it would do is it would include ranked choice voting and larger multi-member districts as an attempt to eliminate the power of gerrymandering. So with a larger district, you would have less impact of those lines, right? It would matter less where they're drawn. And if you had multiple winners who were being elected by ranked choice voting, you would get rid of that kind of winner takes all mentality that really warps the idea of representation in our politics and has kind of pushed everything to the extremes. So there's a lot of really interesting ideas out there, and we're running out of time, however, to enact some of them.
Do you think these interesting ideas and other ideas which might be there has any chance in this country where things are so divided that people are watching different media and doing different things?
I think you're right. We are certainly a divided nation in many ways. But I think what we have to understand is that the structure of our politics has helped create and exacerbate and throw gasoline on those divisions. These single member winner take all districts put all of the emphasis in our politics on the party primary, right? It takes all of the power away from the general election and it moves it into a low turnout summer primary that only the most hardcore members of the base come out. And it incentivizes lawmakers to behave in such a way as to always be looking over their shoulder at the far left or the far right. If we could incentivize politicians to behave differently, then they might actually govern differently, and perhaps some of the polarization in our politics could be eliminated. Rules really matter, and the structure matters. And I think there's a growing awareness in this country that we have to do something about that structure because we're incentivizing all the wrong behavior.
Well, thank you so much, David Daley, for your time with us.
A pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Back to you, Hena.
Thank you so much. That's all from our Washington studios tonight. Thank you for tuning in. You can find previous episodes and more on our YouTube or Facebook. For more content, keep watching Muslim Network TV or visit muslimnetwork.tv. Assalamu alaikum and good night.